I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and this is the Modern Motherhood Podcast from AllMomDoes. Do you ever feel like in the story of Martha and Mary in the Bible that Martha kind of gets a bad rap? We're going to talk this week about that, but first, this review. AL32 Flav writes, real-life examples of women handling life, the good, the bad, and the challenging. I love everything Julie does, and this podcast is no exception. AL32 Flav, thank you so much for that. And I'd love to include your review on the podcast, so leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, back to this question about Martha. Do we give her a hard time in a way that maybe wasn't intended? And what about if you identify more with Martha, the gal who was trying to get it all done and was just trying to be a great hostess, over Mary, who seemed to just be kind of hanging out? My guest, Reid, tackles this topic today. Katie, thank you so much for being with us today on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Julie. It's so fun to be here.
So I love that you are taking a fresh look at this whole idea that those of us who've been around church world for a while, we have been told, now listen, you don't want to be like Martha because Jesus had to scold her. You want to be like Mary. Now, the backstory for those who may not be familiar with this story from the Bible is 2 sisters. Jesus comes over. Martha, just like a Martha Stewart, is trying to get everything perfect, make sure that all of her multi-course dinner is glorious, make sure all the table linens are ironed. She's just go, go, go. And Mary is the one who sits and just listens and chats with Jesus. And Jesus says to Martha, hey, girl, chill. That's the original Greek. You may not have known that, Katie. And so we often take that as a little bit of a statement about those of us who are doers versus those of us who are more relational. So, Katie, what awakened in you that you felt like this would be a good topic to tackle today?
Well, I am definitely made like Martha. I'm a firstborn, an overachiever, a doer. And so when I would read this passage in Luke 10:38 through 42 in the Bible, I was frustrated, honestly. And, I believe the Bible's true, but I kept wanting this story to be different. When Martha goes to Jesus and says, basically, tell my sister to help me out, help a sister out, right? And he doesn't do that. And that used to frustrate me so much because I'm like, I could just picture Martha there, getting everything ready, trying to make things perfect for company, make sure everyone feels comfortable. And she felt all alone, kind of like some of us feel maybe at Thanksgiving, time we're
Absolutely.
busy getting things done and people might have their feet, up on the couch and we're like, hello, And so Jesus doesn't say that to her, though. He says, here's Mary sitting at Jesus's feet, and he says, Mary has chosen the better thing, which won't be taken from her. And he tells Martha, you're worried and distracted by all these things, but this one thing is necessary. So you can imagine from the pulpit, from books we've read, from the woman in the mirror, we've had a lot of guilt, those of us who are made like Martha, because it seems like you said that she was getting this scolding, that her sister is kind of the poster child for getting everything right. So I wanted to take a different look at things with this book.
So what did you begin to find as you dug in a little bit deeper? Because I think we have a lot of messages coming at us today, both from within our faith communities and within the secular world, I think we've embraced the idea that we don't have to be it all or do it all. At least I think philosophically we agree with that. But when I look at how much more complicated I sometimes make my own life because I'll jump on Pinterest or I'll watch that YouTube DIY on whatever, and all of a sudden something that could have been simpler, say for example, Thanksgiving, I have made into this incredible, all-out, multi-level, multi-platform event that can leave me just completely wiped out and then laughing at myself going, but I fully embrace the idea that I don't have to be all things to all people. So what did you begin to find as you dug into this story a little more deeply in a modern age that, times were complicated when Martha was around, and I think we have sort of a self-induced complication of this level of complexity that we've added to things today?
Well, absolutely. My mom just said the other day, she said, there's so much pressure on women your age to kind of be and do all. I think we have opportunities like never before, which is very exciting. But I think a lot of us kind of say yes to maybe everything. I realized a little while ago that I decided I was not going to try to perfect cake decorating because I had all these hobbies already, and I would love to be a good cake decorator, but I can't be a good wife, a good mom, a writer, a speaker, a songwriter, and a cake decorator. And so my sister-in-law is a great cake decorator, and it was that freeing feeling of, I can make room for her gift. I do not have to be every woman. Now, that's easier to say, much harder to do. But as I took a look of the story of Martha, for one, in John, we see this verse that it says, Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And I had overlooked that. I just thought, because a lot of people that are doers, we're kind of ultra responsible. We want to do a good job. We want to manage all the things well. So when we're criticized or pointed out that we might not be handling things well, that's a blow to us because we're trying to do our best. And so I started looking at this. I'm like, you know what? I don't think Jesus's tone is the same tone I've been reading this in, right?
Okay.
He loved her. And I think he was saying, Martha, Martha, from this place of tenderness. It's like with our children, when they do something that's not the best for them, yes, sure, we're exasperated sometimes, but God is patient with us. He has long suffering. And I think out of this place of love, he's just saying, Martha, Martha, there's this other way. But I don't even think he was asking her to stop serving, because we see later on in John 12 that she's serving again, and he doesn't correct her that time. So I think that's where the enemy and other people have kind of gotten in there and twisted the story. Let's just look at what it says. It says in this instance, she didn't choose the best thing. But that doesn't mean that Jesus was criticizing the totality of who Martha was. So a lot of us have tried to shed the skin of our efficiency. We've tried to be different than who God has designed because we've kind of taken this to the extreme.
So how do we begin to identify first? How do we know that we're doers? Now, for example, I'm also an oldest born, so we may have a theme going there, right? But, it's interesting because a lot of times for myself, I still see all that is undone. So there are times that I would tell you, I'm failing at if I am a doer, I don't know. I know other people who really seem like doers because they seem to get more of their loops closed than I do. But I think some of us don't even understand that maybe that's actually who we are, that we just think everybody runs at this certain level of intensity and attention. So how do you know if you're a doer, and how do you begin to make some peace with that?
Well, I like to say, if you're a doer, you get life from checking things off your to-do list. You probably have lots of to-do lists, maybe on your phone, maybe on a piece of paper. I mean, I could go around my house and collect all these things. Sometimes you might add things to your to-do list just for the satisfaction of checking it off.
That's my sister-in-law. Absolutely. As much as I think I'm a doer, that girl, she will go back and put a line item on her list so that she can then get that little endorphin rush of checking it off. Yes.
That's right. But, there's different levels of doers, right? I mean, I'm a doer, but I have not been blessed with like the Energizer Bunny amount of energy. I need to take a rest in the afternoon. I can do a lot of things creatively, but I can't just go like some. And there's some of my friends that have chronic illness. So even though they identify as a doer, they're having a hard time because I can't do these things right now. In the book Made Like Martha, one of my friends, her name is Rachel, and she has to rest for 19 to 20 hours a day to get 4 to 5 hours worth of activity done. And she said something that I think is so important for all of us to remember. She said, God requires I serve him with the strength he provides, not the strength I wish I had.
Ooh.
Isn't that freeing to realize I put more pressure on myself than my husband is, my kids are, and even God is, right? We cannot be perfect as much as we want to be. That's why Jesus had to come. And if we believe in him by faith, his perfection, Jesus himself, is on the throne of heaven, but also through the Holy Spirit lives inside us. And so for me, kind of this journey was, I was trying to measure up on my own strength, and I was failing miserably. And so I was grouchy and discouraged because I thought, I've got to earn God's grace instead of receiving it as a gift. I think for doers, receiving is a hard thing.
Yeah.
Is it not?
I would agree. I think for a lot of doers, receiving is very difficult. But I think it's so powerful what your friend Rachel had to say because, I oftentimes, and I'm assuming you probably do too, I will have people say to me, I don't understand how you do all that you're doing. And for me to try to pretend like there's some replicable system I could hand off to someone. And again, and understand my internal dialogue in part of that is I'm thinking of all the things that are left undone because there are so many in my world that are undone. And yet I didn't earn or, come up with some magical system for getting done the things that God wants me to do. That's his gift to me. So this idea of really living in that place of saying, I'm responsible for doing what I can do within the strength he provides, that is so profound. But you bring up something that I think is really powerful. And that is your attitude at times when you were adding more things to your list beyond what you and your husband had talked about you doing, trying to live in this place beyond the strength that God provides. The attitude that comes. And how do you see Jesus' interaction with Martha? I've always kind of wondered if he wasn't speaking so much necessarily to the activity she was engaged in, but rather the attitude she was bringing to it. Do you see that when you unpack this story?
Absolutely. And I even hypothesized that I'm not sure he was even saying for her to take a seat physically. I think he was asking her to rest within, even while her hands were busy. To know who he was and who she was in light of him, that ushers in that spiritual rest. And of course, we all need physical rest too, right? But as a busy mom, the reality is I'm not going to have this blissful beach moment or this completely quiet house unless I get up at like 4 a.m., which is not happening. You know what I mean? And so we have to live within this tension of there are all these things to do, whether you're wired like a doer or not, just for the sake of you have kids and they have needs. There are things to get done. But I think he was inviting Martha to not serve from a place of striving, but serve from a place of peace. And that peace comes when we're convinced that we're a beloved daughter of God, not the hired help, which is how I lived for so long, like this slave that had to earn their keep. Honestly, like an orphan, that if I don't do these things, it's going to be taken away from me, or other people's success are a threat to my happiness, and I think that Martha in this picture in Luke 10 was living from that place of frenzy and trying to make everything just right. Is not a bad thing, but it can, excellence is one thing, but perfection, like we talked about, it's unattainable apart from Christ. We're not going to ever arrive at that. And I think when we come to terms with that, we can, deep breath and learn to just serve as God leads and in that place of peace.
We'll jump right back into our conversation with Katie Reid here in just a minute. As a mom of 8, I thought I would find the perfect strategy for raising my kids. I thought that I could figure out one rule book that would churn out perfectly mannered, tidy, compliant children. Instead, what God showed me was that he had created each of my children with a specific purpose of his in mind, and that my job was to honor the unique individuals he created each of them to be. I'd like to invite you to check out my best-selling book, Raising an Original, where you'll learn to identify and embrace the God-given temperaments of each of your kids, equipping you to raise your children excited for the path God has for each of them. That's Raising an Original, and you'll find it wherever books are sold. And now back to Katie Reid and her thoughts on Made Like Martha. What do you think is up with our current culture amongst women? When I get on, and I love me some Instagrams, but when I get on the grams, when I get on Pinterest, when I look at these things, we are talking a whole lot. We have all these phrases we're throwing around a lot about transparency and vulnerability, and yet our imaging is often so perfection. And I can get to a place where I get my house cleaned up and get my office organized and think, now that looks pretty good. And all I have to do is then jump on to, a home decor kind of media site content wise. And then I find a discontent again, or I didn't work quite hard enough to get that clutter put that way, and on and on and on. Why do we live in such a dichotomy right now? What is all that about when it comes to the messaging that women receive?
Here's one confession I have. When I get on Instagram, some days I can appreciate the beauty of some of these threads, okay? It's like, oh, that's just so gorgeous. But a lot of days, if I look at someone's feed and it's like perfect, we've got the quote, We've got the soft pink glow here. I can't deal. I mean, if you come on my Instagram, you're like, wow, that looks busy. And it's like, our life is busy. And of course, I love the order. And I'm not criticizing people. I'm just saying, sometimes I just want to take a picture of my dishes that are not done a lot and be like, this is real life, and I know some people do that too. But I think within us, we do crave beauty. We do crave that perfection. And in some ways, that's a glimpse into, we're made for eternity. And so we do want that perfection within, but it can trip us up so much. And I think for me, let's say I bake an apple pie, it doesn't happen very often. You better believe I am taking a picture of that, because as a busy mom, things don't often stay in place.
Right.
So some of that is just we're trying to make ourselves feel better, of like, well, at least for that one Instagram moment, my office looked fantastic. And I don't think that's bad to celebrate those things. I think it's when we're trying to project that our life is always like that it's just unrealistic. I've heard a story of this woman who, she would spend hours like perfecting her shoe. And meanwhile, like her kids, they're hungry, they're grouchy, they're annoyed, and it's like, that is such a disconnect. And so I think for each of us to kind of ask ourselves, why am I putting this up here? I mean, I think it's fine to celebrate it. Hey guys, look, success.
Yeah.
I was just telling my husband the other day, to get real vulnerable, is I said, I think for me, sometimes I use my work to get that validation because people give me a pat on the back, whereas I love my beloved children, but they whine at me, they criticize me, they complain. Now, sometimes there's that shining moment. And that wears you down of just like, oh my goodness. And then you clean something up and then it's messy again. And that can be super discouraging. And so I told them, I said, I think in some ways I'll kind of turn to this too much because facing this is hard.
Right.
Right. And so I think the same thing on social media. It's like a moment of reprieve where everything is as it should be.
Right. I think that's really insightful because there is so much invisible work in this work of mothering, and you can have done a fantastic job. You could have gotten all the beds made and everybody in shoes that actually match, which is a huge challenge at my house. And all it takes is one trip to Target and a kid falling out in the middle of an aisle. And I mean, I cannot be the only one. There is always a woman there who I would think would extend sympathy to me. I've been there, sister. I understand. But there always seems to be a woman there when one of my children just goes ballistic and has a tantrum who has a critique, oh, wow. And in that way that sometimes as women, we can be so amazingly empowering of each other. And sometimes we can be so awful to each other. You just feel like all that work that you got the beds made, you got the kids in the car, you got matching shoes on, and it all fell apart by Target. I do think you're tapping into something that sometimes those social media places, those feeds that we can organize the way that we want and stay a certain way, we're recognizing our need for beauty and order. But maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay that we live in sort of this dichotomy of, let's be more real with each other. And let's also relish those little moments that do have a tranquility. I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at that. I have to laugh. Back in the day, quite a while back, before Instagram, before Facebook, I was blogging. We had 8 children still at home. It was chaos all the time. And there's a game out there that apparently now has gotten there are a little bit naughtier versions of it. But at the time it was very innocent, called Sims. And, you could have your little people and you could create your little world. And so I had a Sims character and she had a beautifully decorated home and it was very organized. And I would just tap in from time to time and just make sure that her world was good. And one day I got on to find that my Sims world was a smoldering heap of ashes. One of my children had gotten on my computer and had a party at my Sims house and left something on the stove and burned down my Sims world. And I just thought, that is such a metaphor right now in this season of life. So digital world doesn't always get you that tranquility that you would hope, but I think you're right. I think you have tapped into something that's right there. Now, one thing I find as a doer, and for other women in my life who are doers, and I see this in Martha's response and what she's asking of Jesus initially, like, would you tell Mary to get up? Doers can be taken advantage of by those who just aren't in the mood. Now, sometimes doers are trying to recruit people into a project that person never signed up for, and that's on the doer. But how do we do a good job of creating appropriate boundaries as doers where we're not being taken advantage of for the fact that we like to get stuff done, we like to get stuff off of our list? Because there are those people, let's face it, they're loungers. So what do we do?
Well, one thing I think we need to own as doers is sometimes, I say this with the most love, we want it my way or the highway, right? So I think we need to ourselves look at that. Like, am I letting other people do something, or do they not want to do it because I'm just going to criticize them or whatnot? So that's one thing we can address. But three powerful words that we all know are yes, no, and help. And for doers, we want to say yes to God's assignments. And like I said before, sometimes I'm saying yes to way more than God's assignments. But the second, and this comes into play with the loungers, is to say no to guilt and manipulation or to enabling. You know, if there's something that God hasn't asked us to do, I mean, sure, there's times we need to take the garbage out just because it needs to be taken out, whether it's our job, right, or not. But we'll say no to guilt and manipulation. I can't tell you how many times that I've taken things on and then other people aren't taking them on that maybe should. And the last one is help, you know, to ask for help. Delegation is not weak, it's wise. But what do you do when you're asking one of those loungers to help and they're not? That can be really tough. And so I guess in that situation, you have to evaluate, does this absolutely have to be done? Is there somebody else I can ask? Or do I just need to do this and serve that person, show them grace, even though I would much rather get even, you know? I think that is tricky, but I think we can look at too, are we adding those things that maybe we're not supposed to be doing? I remember my father-in-law telling the story about how when he and his wife, you know, were first married, you know, she grew up in a single parent home with a very strong mom. And so her daughters, they were doers. They were get it done, take charge. That's just what they did. And so for him, he and his wife had to learn, like she had to pull back, but he had to step up and lead. And then she had to zip her lip if he didn't do it exactly how she wanted to. And he said it was tricky. It was a tricky balance to figure that out. But he was encouraging me. You see where the story is going. But he said, you know, as she pulled back, it gave him opportunity. And he wasn't doing it perfectly. There's sometimes even failed. But if she would have been on him, you know, just like, oh, see, I'm just going to do it, he wouldn't have had the confidence to keep trying, to keep leading in that way. And so I think it can be for us doers, some letting go of control. I think it's also communicating. Sometimes when you're a woman that just gets it done, everyone just expects that you'll do it. There are times where I've tried not to do things and everyone's like, what's going on right now? This is weird. Yeah. But communicating, you know, I had a situation the other day where I was having a hard time and not a lot of friends will come ask me how I'm doing because I'm usually the one kind of checking in on everybody else. But sometimes when you're that, you know, type A, take charge person, you want that reciprocated every once in a while too. Not too often because you want to handle it, you want to management. But, you know, I think that there's that level of appearance of we've got it all together, you know, and sometimes people don't know I'm drowning here. You know, I can't do all these things. I just had a conversation with my husband last night where I said, you know, I've got a full work day. I tried to get a babysitter. I can't. And he's like, I will help you out, you know, and it wasn't convenient for him either, but it was that give and take of like, if I try to do all this, it's going to fall apart.
I think that you bring up such an important aspect of the doer within marriage because two doers, that sounds like that should be ideal, right? However, I have often found sometimes in marriages that I would identify with two strong doers, it's very hard for them to acquiesce to one another. And particularly if they both get ahead of steam on particular projects or work experiences, whatever, they have a very hard time dovetailing. At the same time, I think the doer married to the lounger is a real challenge. I'm seeing more and more of that in women's ministry for me today. And just guys who really aren't interested in doing much of anything, including working outside the home, and women who are carrying all of it, which is a very interesting dynamic, along with just a partner who is very much a doer and one who's just more relaxed. It's not that they're a lounger, they're just a little more relaxed in their pacing. And so I think to really understand who you are in correlation to your spouse without a judgment thing coming into place and doing exactly what your father-in-law talked about, learning the dynamic and the dance of making sure that both a doer and then someone who is very comfortable to sit and chat and take their time to make sure that both parties are being honored. Now, how much do you think that doers wrestle with their own sense of self-worth?
I can speak from personal experiences. This was my battle, is I was trying to earn love from God and other people by how much I did. And productivity to me equaled value, even though I wouldn't say that. That's how I was living. And the best example I can give is my brother has Down syndrome. And he and I have different productivity levels, right? But in God's eyes, we are both equally as valuable. And I think it goes back to our worth was cemented into ourselves before we could even lift a finger, before we could do anything. And so as God started teaching me that, because here's the thing too, I'm getting older. There is coming a point where I'm not going to be able to do everything, but that doesn't make me less valuable. And in our society, in our culture, that's countercultural, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's like, be in your glory days. But you think of infants too. They can do nothing but cry and poop and eat, yet they have so much value, or they should. And so I think when we realize our value comes from that we are made in the image of God, not in what we do, that we can't earn the love that we already have, that He's already given us in Christ.
And so I think that really is germane to what Jesus is saying to Martha as well, is choose to live in that place of understanding that you are loved, period. And don't allow the anxiety around the performance to begin to eat away at you and to make you feel that your worth has to be earned. Now, you say you identify as a modern Martha. Those are your words, not mine, with 5 kids. What advice do you have for navigating your to-do list when it comes to parenting? We touched a little bit on outside relationships, work relationships, marriage. How does this doer mentality, Martha mentality play into parenting?
Well, as a doer and as a recovering perfectionist, the to-do list can be long for myself and my family, and that can be quite annoying to them, right? And so I am trying to remember that, to say yes to God's assignments, to say no to guilt manipulation, and to say help when I need it, realizing that sometimes the help I get is not going to be up to my impossible to meet standard. Like to say, okay, the kitchen is clean. There might be a little stray cereal there. The counter might not be gleaming, but it's done. And I think one key for me that has helped, and I'm still learning it, is to try to celebrate what we've already done, because there's always more to do. So to take a minute and be like, oh my goodness, this house looks way better than it did a couple hours ago. Again, it's still not where I want it to be, but I try to bite my lip about it and say, wow, you guys did a great job cleaning up. Let's have a little dance party. Or let's just take a moment and feel good about it. Because as a doer, a driver, an improver, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but
yes.
I'm a 1 with a 2-wing, but that 1 is sure strong. So everything could be improved upon. And I don't want my kids growing up feeling like they're not good enough. There was always something, because to me, it's like I see the potential in everything. But I'm trying to learn that sometimes good enough is good enough, to celebrate the effort, not to be an enabler, but like when they put forth a good effort, to recognize that and to let some of that other stuff go. Because I don't want them to be on edge at home that, oh my gosh, what's mom going to ask me to do now? So I have been doing this thing in the summer, which I don't know if it's helpful or not, but I'll say, you can go play outside or you can come inside and do a job with me. They've been playing outside much more.
Brilliant. I love it. And I think it's such wisdom, Katie, because I have seen moms with the best intention, long to-do lists, wanting to make home. Now, really what they mean is the house, not home, but make home perfect, to where kids are putting in effort. They're trying to make the bed themselves and mom's stripping it all back and redoing it. And they try to help put away the dishes from the dishwasher and they didn't put the forks in the drawer the correct way, those kinds of things. And what moms can unintentionally do if they've got this strong, let's call it a Martha wing on the Enneagram, if they've got that, is they undo what their children are trying to do, and in the doing, undo their children's sense of accomplishment. And so I think there's so much wisdom in saying when it's good enough. One of my brothers is quite the business guy, and he always tries to remind me that, projects are never really completed, they're abandoned. You have to choose the moment at which you're going to say, all right, that accomplished what we pretty much wanted it to, and it's all good. So great wisdom for you when it comes to Martha parenting. So the new book, Made Like Martha, Good News for the Woman Who Gets Things Done. Officer Judy Hopps at your service. Katie Reid, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much. And one thing I just wanted to say too is that as doers, we can be hard on ourselves. So to remember that Jesus loves you, whether or not you get this right or whether or not you get it done. That was settled. And so as we learn this, we want to be patient with ourselves, and just ask God to help us, because it's not something we're going to just achieve one day, poof, I've got this all under control.
Absolutely. And in all the conversation that we have that I love about productivity and strategies and different ways to think about getting things done, to really stay in that place of rest and peace with Him, I think that is truly the first and foremost priority on that list. And if we can check that one off, then all the rest will follow. Connect with Katie on Instagram at Katie_M_Reid. And you can also find more info on her on the show notes. You can find me at Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest as Julie Lyles Carr. Would love to connect with you there. AllMomDoes.com and AllMomDoes on the socials is an incredible place for you to find other women in your season of life and to find inspiration for your mom journey. Let's give a big high five to Donna Toti, our producer, who deals with all my audio starts and stops and gets it all cleaned up, and Rebecca Beckett, our content coordinator, who also puts those great show notes together for you. They're the force behind the scenes that gets the podcast out to you each and every week, and I couldn't be more grateful. So do us a favor and subscribe and share and give us a shiny 5-star review and rating. That helps us get the word out about the podcast to others. We'll see you next week on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.